For years together, the British ruled India. Whenever we talk about our history, we talk about pre-independence and post-independence. Those are the two very different eras that we lived in. Whether the British helped us progress or did they demote us? That's the question that we have to answer today. Welcome to St. Joseph's College of Commerce. I am with the students of BBA department who are going to talk about this for some time now.
I'm going for the proposition. So one of the best things that happened to us after British colonialism is the fact that they sowed the seeds of globalization into us. Whatever we see, because of technological advances, political advances, or economic advances, it's the seeds which they sowed. And this is the impact of globalization which we are seeing.
Hello, and I'm against the motion. Firstly, I would like to answer the question that our moderator posed to us. So I definitely believe that after the independence, the Britishers definitely left us economically drained. And this is also, you can see this in a factual, the facts that are provided are that Angus Madison, one of the renowned British economists, said that before the Britishers landed in India, India was contributing 23% to the world economic GDP, and after the Britishers left on 1947, we were contributing to less than 4%. This definitely shows us that India was definitely economically drained. And to counter a point by the first speaker, I would like to say that I definitely do not believe that the seeds of globalization were put into the Indian economy by the Britishers. This is because LPG was passed, the Act LPG was passed in 1991, which is way after the Britishers had left India. In fact, Jawaharlal Nehru supported the Soviet Union instead of the Western economies. This is because after years of torture and dehumanization and plunder by the Western civilizations, we were definitely, we were wary of these civilizations. Anyone?
I'd also like to add that as far as globalization is concerned, India has been conducting international trade long before the British even set foot on Indian soil. So you cannot say that the Britishers set the tone for globalization in India.
I'd like to go on. No, you go.
Okay, talking about how you guys are saying that Britishers didn't Britishers were the main impact of it, but do you even know that after independence we got so much of foreign exchange? Our foreign exchange has increased from $300 billion, has gone up to $300 billion from $2 billion, and it has created a lot of foreign exchange reserves in our country and got a lot of change in our country and giving us many job opportunities in India.
Well, just to counter your point over there, you see, we got a lot of foreign exchange, right? But the truth of the matter is, the Indian government, the Indian Union government at the time was receiving about, I think, 300 million in terms of their annual revenue. Well, the Nizam of Hyderabad, the last Nizam of Hyderabad, himself had a wealth of 600 million. Well, you count for inflation, that still amounts to a huge gap. And that gap is solely because the British, well, they came to India with the intent of plunder. They had no other intent. They had, well, to be true, they stole us and they looted from us. I don't think we can come to any conclusion that is not that the British looted us outright in center.
Okay, the talk has been going on towards how the Britishers actually came down to India by seeing how wealthy it was. But to be noted, India was, or the British Raj, was a huge country, all right? And a lot of, we had 560 princely states that were ruled independently, all right? And Nizams, like you pointed out, that was also ruled independently, where the Britishers had no say in whatever the Nizam was doing. What the Britishers captured were the underdeveloped and non-functioning, non-organized states of India, all right? And that's why they say that's the passage of India, so that they could have developed their trade, they could have developed the British trade. And only reason why exports went on during the British Raj was only in the places where British existed. For example, East Africa, South Africa, the United Kingdom itself. All right. So to point out saying that it was purely because of that is something that I don't believe. They saw that Indian market was a huge market, and that's the reason they tried to tap into it. Now, I'd like to see if anybody has a point saying probably it was anybody who likes what they did here. Is there anybody like that?
Just about colonialism, I think people, when come to history, they don't understand perspective. man has been plundering man since the dawn of man. So the British didn't start it, and the British will definitely not be the end of it. So to blame, okay, Western civilization did it. Well, okay, they did the best because they had the technology, but let's not just single them. Indians have been doing it. Indians, we had a lot of princely states way before them, and we do it currently to our own selves. So, and also what the British did in getting our railways, in getting building irrigation dams, building all this, it definitely helped us in the post-independence era to progress.
Adding further to his point, so if you see right now, there's a blame game, right? So all of us blame the British for plundering our entire country. Prior to that, they blame the Mughals. Prior to that, if you're going... Delhi Sultanate. Yeah, the Delhi Sultanate. So if you're going back history, you can go all the way back till the Aryan race came to India. Yeah. And then they invaded and they killed the Dravidians and they ruled over the Dravidians. So you can't just make a blame game. So we are potentially seeing a lot of, a very good impact in many positive ways from the British era. So...
Okay, you give the go.
So I would just like to say that human behavior and so the speaker talked about how we as humans normally plunder, and I don't think that's any excuse for what the Britishers did when they were in India. This debate is specifically mentioning the impact of the British rule in the Indian economy. So for that, I would just like to say that you cannot talk about railways because firstly, Indians were the one who paid for the railways. We paid with our own taxes, even because Indians were going through poverty and we did not have and our economy was in a state of crisis, and that is when the Britishers imposed taxes on us to build these railways. And a little known fact is that building the Indian railway tracks cost 9 times as much during the British Raj as it would have done in countries like USA or Canada at the same time. So they were basically looting us and like using railways for their own purpose. They did not build it for the Indian people.
And also, additionally, about the railways, apologists especially, talk about how the Britishers built the railways to connect India. Well, the truth is, it was never intended to benefit Indians. If you look at initial railway lines that were built at the time during the British era, it was only to transport resources from central India to the ports, so those resources could be taken back to Britain or to other countries solely for British benefit. And this is especially evident by the fact that during World War I and World War II, when the Britishers required railway lines in other parts of the world where their troops were stationed, they just ripped out railway lines from different parts of India to transport them to other parts of the world so they could use them to their benefit even in other places.
And just replying to the point that was mentioned about the blame game. See, the difference is we have a lot of invaders in India. We had Central Asian invaders come, the Mughals have come. But the difference between the British invaders and the rest of them is that the rest of them came and they didn't change certain rules about the Indian economy of the time. The villagers never really led a completely different type of life. And that's because the British came with the intent of making India their personal chop shop. They wanted India to be their puppet, and they were the leeches that stole all our raw materials, that converted everything that would have been our benefit to their benefit. I think that's the difference. Difference is the rulers wanted our land and maybe our livelihood, but they never wanted all our money and all our resources. They starved us, and as a result, as you can see, the famine of 1770, they starved Bengal, they starved each and every state equally, and they didn't discriminate there. Yes, maybe kudos to them, but I think the only positive I can find from British rule is that they probably united the country in that factor. I guess that's the only benefit. But I truly believe the benefits do not outweigh the negatives.
To my fellow colleagues who are debating on the fact that they think the Britishers had a positive impact on the economic development of India, I would like to hear your points. Rather than saying things like the Mughals did this worse than the Britishers, I would like to hear points on how the Britishers did something better than the Mughals. Does anyone have a point? Oh, sorry.
All right, that makes quite a lot of sense. But if you think about economically speaking, the real question here lies is, did the Britishers leave us with something that we can develop on, or did they loot us completely and throw us down to Droghton? That's the question that I want you guys to think upon and then answer. With an open mind, just let me know that with the resources that they left us and with the resources that they took away with them, weigh both of them out and see where we could have been after so many years of independence. We'll start with you.
Okay, so talking about how Britishers helped us. Okay, first I want to say that don't you think that if Britishers wouldn't have conquered India, we would still be under the kingdom and all under that rule. We would still be the slaves of them, and they have so much of gold right now. The Mysore king has so much of gold with him and so much of property that if he gives that money out, that we'd have to pay very less taxes compared to what we are paying right now. And second, how British helped us. Clearly, job employment did bring in a thing because our technology and everything advancements happen, like he pointed it out earlier. And second, the cloth manufacturing, we did have a faster and a better production of cloth and everything, so that again gave us a job opportunity by letting us have more and more of growth in that field.
Okay, so as our moderator said, if you're going to weigh out the negatives and the positives, well, the positives are very few. Yes, they might have united the country and might have, just united the country, but they completely destroyed our cottage industry system. Everything, our artisans, our people, the people who were involved in all the handicraft were completely oppressed. They were run out, and not only did the British invaded with all their goods, with all their merchandise, which they sold to us, which all the benefits went to Britain, not to us. So I'm not sure how you can exactly say they left us with anything, if they left us with.
Okay, you're saying that you're not sure that how they left us with anything, but okay, clearly Bangalore was a place where the roads and everything's built by the Karnataka government, and where Mysore, all the roads and everything was built by the Britishers or the Mysore kingdom. So do you see the difference between the build structure and everything what they have over there?
Statement you are asking me, asking the other speakers what the British left us with. I would like to point out to you that the very institution that you are studying in is established by the Jesuits, who came along with the British, and so it's true that at that point of time they did use whatever they built for them, but they didn't necessarily take all of it back, right? They left it for us so that we could build on it. So in that sense, even though at that point of time they built whatever they did for themselves, they did leave it back for us so that we could build on it and probably prosper later on.
And also just think about the language we're using, English. They're the ones who got the English language to us. Then, and also if they did a lot of stuff, but they also abolished sati. They gave us the legal system. So it's not like they just plundered us and everything negative. I think it should be a little more balanced in how you approach.
I think it's almost funny how people say that it's the British rule that gave us a unified India. If you look at it's not just colonial rule that made country, that unified countries. If you look at countries like China, Japan, Thailand, they also had royal families. They didn't need to be colonized in order to become like a united democracy.
Okay, no, your comment.
In order to rebuke that, a country like China or Japan does not have the cultural differences that we do. So I think there was the need for an alien force to actually oppress us, left us unified in order to counter them. Okay, if it wasn't for the British, we would just be fighting amongst ourselves and not against an alien force, right? So if it wasn't for them, we would still have 23 or more countries within the Indian subcontinent that would be warring each other and would be looting each other.
But so instead of 23, we have 3. So it's still not like we're still a unified country.
Okay. So I would just firstly like to point out about the education system. The Britishers did not introduce education system into India for our benefit. They did it for theirs. As we can clearly see in Lord Macaulay's minute, like the famous minute, he says that he wants to create a divide between the lower class and the upper class, and also religion. The fact that our college was mentioned, Christianity was brought into India so that they could divide our culture, our society into an upper class, lower class, on the basis of religion. This is how. So here's the thing: education was introduced into India, but what was taught in India was completely different from what was taught back in the Britain. So here's the thing: the upper class were taught about English literature, so that they would praise the British literature and how the society that the way the people live there, and the lower class people were taught about religion to make them even more I don't know what was it called? I'm sorry, I'm missing out the word. Sorry.
All right, a lot is being talked about the language. Now, this is a point, all right? You mentioned China. In China, everybody speaks one language.
No, two.
All right? Two languages.
Yeah, Cantonese
all right?
and Mandarin.
Cantonese and Mandarin. But the point is, everybody understands the other language, correct? The two languages, everybody understands, whether it's north or south of China. Both of them.
Cantonese and Mandarin are completely different. They're written the same way, but they're spoken differently. So
Okay.
a person who knows Cantonese will not be able to understand Mandarin.
All right. What I want to tell you here is when you say we're being divided into classes and stuff, you have to understand that Indians were very proud of the culture they had and the local language that they always wanted to speak. All right. Now, here's just a point. If there was one singular language across our country, don't you think it would have been so much easier to handle labor, trade, and no matter what we did throughout? All right. So do you guys believe that we as Indians retaliated too much to any of the ideas? We were not open to the ideas of economic development or social change from the Britishers. Do you guys agree on that? Wait, 1 second, but
Yeah, I think right now we see a society that's so orthodox, and back then it was much more orthodox than it is right now. So even if there was something that was being brought upon by the British in the Indian society, they would look at it as an alien force trying to convert them into their religion. And talking about what you said, that Christianity was brought about to divide the various classes, I would like to point out to you, Christianity gave home to all those suppressed lower class Hindus to have a religion of their own. Now, these Hindus I'm specifically talking about are the Dalits who weren't allowed into temples specifically because of the class that they belong to. Whereas when the Christian missionaries came about and introduced their religion, they offered them a place where they could go and worship freely without having to be a part of a particular class. So the entire concept about you telling us that, Christianity divided us is completely wrong, because they only gave homage to the ones that belong to the lower sect of the Hindu society, which is actually dividing on the basis of class and caste and whatnot.
This notion that apparently the British introduced Christianity just ridiculously false. Thomas, Jesus' own disciple, came to India and he died in Tamil Nadu. His mount is right there. And so, but I think the debate it's almost like a West versus East debate. Okay, so anything the West comes in on has to be evil, has to be wrong. But if you look at the West, they're the most technology, the most advanced, most freest, prosperous civilization on the planet. And the way there are some principles I think they followed, and if we maybe they did it by force, the British, but if we look and try to adopt some of that, like their legal system, like their thing on the individual and stuff like that, I think we would be much greater.
So talking about most of the social evils, that's what British got rid of. And also the other colleagues spoke about the intent of education. The intent of education might be different for the British. Their intent was for their own benefit, but however, the impact is very different. The very fact that we study English in every school right now, and the very fact that English is an official language of India, that's the kind of impact which we are seeing. And though I really advocate all the languages and the cultural heritage of India, the need of a unified language was very much necessary, and that's what we are seeing because of English.
As far as technological advancement is concerned, where some speakers pointed out that without the British, we would have probably been a very backward country. I'd like to point out that as far as shipbuilding, I'm going to take shipbuilding as an example. Indian shipbuilding and ports were like the most advanced they were at the time when the British entered India. They used stronger wood, so they use teak, the woods like teak and sal. So the ships would last longer than 20 years, whereas British ships themselves used oak and fir, and they last probably around 11 or 12 years. So looking at all of these, the British realized this, and therefore there were policies put in place. So Indian shipbuilders were put out of business. Indian sailors weren't allowed to board British ships. So I think their policies were purposely put in place to put India at a technological disadvantage. And I think if not for the British, we would have slowly developed anyway, but we would have developed with a level playing ground which wasn't provided to us by the considering that the British took away all advantage that we might have had.
Yeah, and see, if we're going to speak about the social impact that the British had, I think you are quite a big example of exactly what they did to us. Is that they crushed our belief to. They made us think that they are better than us, made us think they are superior than us, and that we cannot develop without them. That is false. Okay, maybe they brought it to us, but there is no way in saying that they're the only ones who could have brought it to us, or they're the only way that we could have progressed. We could have done the same thing maybe in a later date. Now that's one thing. Second thing is when you specifically spoke about certain cities that took a lot of positives in terms of infrastructure. Well, if you talk about the cities that were benefited, yes, well and good, but you also need to talk about the cities that were plundered, that were left to waste. Cities like Dhaka and Surat were all left to waste because the people could not function, because their livelihoods were being taken away, because they were mainly handicraft industries, cities made of handicraft industries, people who were using looms, people who were in terms of making metalworks. Metalworks. So all these industries were depleted because the British were pushing their merchandise onto us, their products onto us. So what that means is, like we said, it was an economic drain. And I don't think you can talk about one benefit without exactly saying that, because the negatives cancel them out. That's it. That is exactly what I meant by they left us with nothing, because the negatives cancelled out and then some more.
Okay, talking about the impact, I would like to talk about in the field of science, right? Because of religion, there was a lot of superstitious beliefs. For example, if you talk about the eclipses, a lot of us believe that it is because of gods eating away sun or eating away the moon or something like that. So what the Western globalization, or what the Western culture made us realize is what is actually true. Because of the golden era of science from the 16th century, we fundamentally understood what exactly it is. Because of their way of scientific experiment, we finally understood how to understand what is actually true and what is superstition. So, and this also made a passage for us, a lot of Indian mathematicians and physicists, to go ahead and discover on their own. So if you talk about Srinivasa Ramanujancharya, he had a passage because of the British. He could so C.V. Raman and many of the Indian scientists, they could finally get a career, and they themselves were very strongly successful in this too.
If you want to talk about science and how it didn't grow in India, or we didn't grow, it was because of the 200 years of stagnant of the economy. It didn't grow. It was at 1.2%, which it didn't grow at all. And when there isn't a money flow, or if there isn't cash in the system where we can use it, it is a point that we can't grow, right? We can't. There's no technological advancement because there isn't any knowledge.
I would like to rephrase my statement. I never spoke about the technological advances or any kind of infringement that British plays. I just spoke about what the British introduced to us, the spirit of science, and what is true and what is superstition. That's all.
Okay, a lot was spoken about how labor is being used in our country and how everybody is thinking about growth per se. Okay, so India today is one of the biggest developing economies in the world. Agreed. That is something because of cheap labor. Correct me if I'm wrong. Cheap labor, various resources, large range of resources available in our country, a huge population, and that's something that existed even back then. And I believe that it's just very rational to me that, the Britishers realized this long ago. And they decided they wanted to invade India for that one specific reason. That this is a country that they could see their name or the brand of British rule develop. And that's the only reason, I think. Because back then, that's how things worked. Like, you would invade a country and you'd make them yours. And if rationally thinking, if that's true, then we are still the same. I mean, if you think about it, we haven't developed anyhow. And the only hindrance I feel was when the Britishers were here, we were very reluctant to agree to what they were saying, and we were very reluctant based on, we weren't supportive enough of their ideas, and we weren't open to it because it was new, and that's something that developed in the West. Could we be as developed as the European Unions, or could we be as developed as the US or Canada, or any Australia for that matter, if the Britishers still existed in India? Because it was a huge population that they had to cater to. Agreed? So starting off another country and getting them to development takes a lot of time. They took about 150 years to just leave us with whatever they did. Now, if they did stay on and if we carried on their vision, then I think we would have been in a much better place now. But if anybody disagrees to that, more than welcome.
So I completely disagree with what you say. So we can always debate about the specifics of what if. What if the Britishers had not come to India for the 200 years? What if we had not stagnated? What if, they had actually done something for our country, for the benefit of our country, instead of just plundering and looting us? But that could go on for all day long. So here's what I would like to say. So unemployment was not as big a problem now as it was. It was not as big a problem before the Britishers came into India as it is now. This is simply because of the term deindustrialization. So here's what happened. When the Britishers came to India, we were the leading textile producers. We were the leading, we had 23, we were contributing 23%, 27% to the Indian world economy. And that is a huge deal. We also had the word steel. Okay, so we invented the word steel and it was prized. People from all over the countries, all over the world came to India to trade in steel, textile, ships. We had a huge economy going on. And for my opponents to even, for my colleagues to even hint at the fact that we were this desolate we were this desolate economy that had no support. It's just ridiculous. Here's the thing. So the Britishers came into India, and here's how they implemented deindustrialization. They physically broke the looms, and also they broke. There's a witness. There's an account where a person has witnessed Indian weavers having their thumbs chopped off because the Britishers did not want the weavers to get back into the practice of making textiles. Even if they could make up the looms. Okay, Shilat.
Like she said, there is an account that says that. So what happened is Indian textiles were so cheap that British textile manufacturers couldn't compete in any way. So they wanted them eliminated. And the soldiers of the British East India Company were more than happy to oblige by breaking looms. And according to one account, breaking or chopping off the thumbs of the weavers. Now this affected, this decay of the handloom sector affected not only just the textile industry but also agriculture. Because now that these artisans were left without a livelihood, there was a large influx of these artisans into agriculture, and with their lack of experience in agriculture, it brought down rural wages. Now another thing, typically in rural households, the woman would stay at home and weave and spin cloth, and the man would go out and till in the fields. So now with the woman being out of a job, their only source of income was agriculture. Now with frequent droughts and with the output being affected by the weather, they had no backup source of income to turn back to, and this rural poverty was a direct result of British action.
And well, the simple fact is India went from being a net exporter to being a net importer with the British. You talk about globalization, how the British kind of showed it to us. Well, the truth is we were trading with multiple European markets. But by the time the British came, we traded with one market, Britain. That's not globalization, that's isolation. We were isolated from the world market. Like someone has already mentioned, we went from 27% to 4%. So did the British ever have the intention of making us better? No. They came to plunder, and I think if they stayed, we would only gone from bad to worse. It was only through the efforts of our people that we have come where we are now, and I think we should be proud of that.
So I just try to introduce just a different perspective. Our country, India, came to existence in 1947. So it's not like we were a united country. It's not like the British, when they came in, they broke our sovereignty. So our country itself wasn't even formed. So it's not like they plundered us, but we were plundering each other with our princely states. And we had the Mughals, we had all these. So it's not, our country existence only came about 70 odd years ago. So it's not like, so the same thing when the Europeans went to the Americas, it's not like they had a country back then, so they stole the land. In that land, they were with all the tribes, all the strongest tribes stole it from the weakest tribe. So the imperial conquest is just a universal ethic. The strong man always wins. But now we have a country, we are a sovereign country, and we can use what the British left us with. So it's not like we had a country back then, they overrode our sovereignty. It's not like we were united then.
Yeah. So adding further to the point, it was just like the survival of the fittest. So as I previously mentioned, reiterating the same point, prior to that, the Aryan race completely came and they destroyed all the Dravidians who were there. The Mughal race did the same. That's the whole nature of invasion, and that's how it works. And but then British left us with so many other stuff. They left us with democracy. They left us with parliamentary system. They left us most of the acts. Yeah, the judicial system. Most of the acts and the judicial system we see right now is something very similar to what the British follow right now too. We have fabricated according to our present scenario and our culture and other factors, but however the fundamental base of it is more or less the same.
Okay, I don't know, one of the speakers mentioned about how the British destroyed the livelihood of the women that work for the textile industry. But it's important to note that if it wasn't for the British, the abolishments of sati and dowry would never have come across. We would still treat that as a cultural change that we would never be open to, and we would still have women that would commit suicide on the pyres of the husbands that have passed away. So if it wasn't for the British, these social evils would still have existed today in not a country, in many countries within this Indian subcontinent that would still be warring with each other, that would still go to another country and end up raping their women and killing their children. So right now we have, okay, you just said 3 countries right now, but if it wasn't for the British, there would be 20 or more countries that would still have these social evils, that would still keep on plundering, and there would be no sense of economy, there would be no judicial system, there would be no democracy. We would just be a set of warring states that would just want to control each other's dominions. And yeah.
So about social evils that you talked about, like sati, dowry, well, let's leave sati aside. Sati, I agree that the British was definitely were the ones who brought about prohibition. But as far as child marriage and dowry are concerned, the laws that were enacted to prohibit these social evils only came about after
Problem that's bigger than what happened over the Middle East the last few previous years, and how much money was lost there, how much lives and livelihoods were lost there.
Since you got the topic of partition, the partition wasn't the idea or anything with regards to British. It was the total idea about 2 presidents, Jinnah and Jawaharlal Nehru, fighting for the seat of prime minister. Since they both wanted to rule India, so they decided to have a separate India. Pakistan was part of India, so Mohammed bin Jinnah wanted that place. That's why he ruled it. It wasn't the Britishers doing. Britishers supported this because they were gaining a lot of output. That's it. Britishers played smart. That's it.
We're going to see the British had no impact on this major political thing. Then I think that's another debate entirely. I think let's not enter that. That's another debate entirely.
So when I spoke about democracy, I didn't talk about the fact that they literally gave it to us. I spoke about the principle and how democracy works. That's what I spoke about. I do understand, yeah, there were a lot of depredations caused over past 200 years when the rule was there. But as I previously mentioned, that is the very nature of invasion. You can't expect them to come to our country. Being generous. I'm not saying they were generous, am I? I'm saying the very principle of democracy never existed prior to them. They were just kingdoms. They were warring states and etc.
And just to solidify that point, look, the political document which truly defines India is our constitution, and it's a direct influence from the British Raj. It's from the Americas, the Britain, Australia. So the very political document which defines who we are, our liberties, our values, came from them. So that's probably the biggest impact. Look at all our freedoms we have is from our constitution. And where did we get that from? We got it from all these countries.
You had a point to make?
Yes. So I would just like to say that when we talk about unification of India after 1947, here's what I have to say about that. I think that's the biggest misconception that people have, that we were unified after 1947. I think the partition was the worst thing that the Britishers did to the Indian economy and society. Here's why. It's because the Britishers enabled Indians to think that economy and politics and religion are the same thing. So here rules like the Muslims were only allowed to vote for the Muslim seats. Things like this instilled in us these things instilled in us. Instilled in us our religion. Okay, so it told us that our religion, well, we were divided based on religion, and I think this was the worst thing that the Britishers could have done, because we can still see it today in today's politics and economics. And the thing is, our economic policies and where we are headed as an economic country is decided by the politics who represent us. And I think this was one of the biggest wounds that the Britishers left on India.
Moving forward to
Again, adding on to what she said, if you look at the first Battle of Independence, the Indian soldiers who fought in the British East India Company Army, everyone, I think all of us have studied about the fact that at one point the rifles were greased with pig fat to offend the Muslims, and at one point it was greased with cow fat to offend the Hindus. So from the beginning, from 1857, if I'm not mistaken, is when the seeds of communal discord were sowed. And the entire Muslim League as such was formed because the Britishers followed alternating policies of Hindu appeasement and Muslim appeasement. So partition, the seeds of partition were definitely sowed by the British. If not for that, we who knows? We wouldn't have had East Pakistan, West Pakistan, and India.
To the best of my knowledge, I think 23 countries unifying into 3 is a form of unification. I do understand that separation had a lot of communal issue, a lot of various kind of pernicious things was made to the entire society. But 23 to 3 countries, I think that's it's a very good stance of unification more than separation, to be honest. So, yeah.
And also, if the British initiated this sort of identity politics based on religion, then it should have been over by now. Why isn't it over right now? We still have politics based on beef ban, based on this temple, masjid. So if the British did it, then it should have been over by now. I thought we were better than this.
So even prior to the British rule, all of this kind of communalism did exist. It's not like it wasn't there. Even when the Mughals came in, there was the communal riots. Then there was communal differences. Then it's not like they instilled it.
Okay, what I believe now is the conversation is going slightly more political than economical. That's not what we are here for. That's a discussion for another day. But it definitely does have certain amount of impact. It has a lot of impact. But what we wanted to concentrate here was the points that we discussed some time back, which is how they looted us, how did they try to stop the trade that we already had, which was our strength, and how did they actually try to take that away from us and make India something like a factory zone for the colonial British, right? And so that was the discussion of today, and all of you have given some good inputs, some really good inputs about how the conditions were, and thank you all for that. And this discussion will be ended by saying that there is absolutely, we could talk about this for days together, but there's no way we'll be able to figure out whether or not was this a good thing or a bad thing for us, right? And I think that's a discussion that you guys should keep thinking about and see and keep weighing it out, as in how well could it go or how well could it not have gone, all right? So thank you everybody for tuning in today and watching this discussion. See you at the next Spotlight.